Durgan, who assures me he's
well,
only got 45 slides.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I hope on the screen you see a white.
We do.
A few things around me. Lovely. Well, good morning. Thank you very much and welcome to my busy slide here. Robin asked me to give a quick canter through a small project we've been working on the last couple of years. Yesterday, Robin asked how long this presentation would be. And I said, I don't know if it's 5 minutes or 15, so we will find out, but it doesn't quite have 45 slides. You'll be
disappointed. I'm disappointed, Durgan.
Sorry. What can one do at 11 o'clock at night? So with no further ado, let me click this button here. So following on from Pete Jones's presentation a few months ago, where Pete suggested that he might work as a CISO in one of these buildings. Well, for the last 15 years, we've been operating and looking after over 30 buildings in this picture and several in this picture as well. So essentially, as the first slide suggested, this little presentation is about smart buildings and cybersecurity. So are there any takers in the first instance? By all means, shout out. What is a smart building? I don't know if anyone has a definition. I'll give you 10 seconds to say something, or perhaps 20.
A building with sensors that are connected to computers that provide information to help run the building.
Thank you very much. Well, you may be surprised to learn, Jeff and all, that actually most vendors who deploy building management systems define a smart building as being a building management infrastructure which is connected to the internet, which on the face of it could be quite bad, because with no security controls around it, where often it can be found, obviously that puts the building at huge risk with the amount of interconnected systems directly connecting to the internet. They are developing and being deployed at an extremely fast pace. And ultimately, those people who both manage and, more importantly, own the risk historically come from a mechanical and electrical background, where they would hold hammers and spanners and tap things and they would start working. Now there's a little cable dangling out the back of a air handling unit or water pump or something, which essentially is a completely new world. So essentially a smart building, on the left you can see the typical infrastructure which might be connected, not limited to, I hasten to add, a corporate network, but certainly on a facilities network or building management network, there is, you will see on the right hand side of the screen there, a huge collection of systems connected, interconnected and converged, and ultimately dependent upon the building management owner. We can either see segregated networks or indeed converged, which is i.e. converged networks with the corporate side and the building management. So you've got things like fire alarms, HVAC, obviously data room, argon gas, and so on. So these things can be interconnected, which obviously puts much more risk. So that world is evolving very fast. I don't know if anyone can remember this and what happened last year, perhaps. A few nods, thank you. So you may recall the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, which affected basically most of the US between the 6th and 12th of May last year. And in the wake of the SolarWinds compromise in 2020, the Colonial Pipeline attack essentially caused the US government to review its national critical infrastructure, cybersecurity controls, which obviously, or not so obviously, do not follow typical IT cybersecurity standards. They are different because of the potential risk of life and so on. So essentially, the US government mandated that when implementing critical infrastructure security, it should align to a global standard called IEC 62443. The main lessons from the colonial pipeline were that that an organization should have proactive cyber monitoring, so things like SOX, SIEM, and SOAR, protecting IT and OT conversion networks, and more governance to manage enterprise risk. So IEC 62443 is an international series of standards that addresses cybersecurity for operational technology in automation and control systems. Typically, you know, as the colonial picture suggests, it's more industrial control systems, pharmaceutical, manufacturing, and the like. So what we've been doing over the last 2 years is essentially manipulating IEC 62443 into the smart building space. For the last 15 years, we've been operating along with our partners, SecureArm and SetSat and CrossSite, in the building management environment. And more recently, we were taking part in a 4-year project, a £200 million refurbishment project in Canary Wharf, where essentially, from an infrastructure perspective, we implemented a virtual chassis network. The network grew from literally a few hundred sensors to several thousand sensors on the network. So the complexity of the network increased dramatically, and obviously the threat surface of that building was dramatically increased. So certainly WannaCry was a huge wake-up call for building management operators, and certainly I remember a meeting going in when I re-engaged with this particular organization. The whole agenda had been pushed apart, other than "it's nice to see you again." It was the week after WannaCry, and the question was asked was, are we secure? Certainly the budget suddenly materialized, and that is what we've seen over the last years, that risk owners are taking much more note of their cybersecurity of their estate. And for many years, we had been saying, if you want to attack a bank, you don't attack the corporate network, you attack the building to disrupt their operations. So turn the heating up in summer, turn the fire alarm on, the building does not operate, and therefore the tenants within it and so on. And there have been a number, sorry, not many, but high profile attacks against buildings, predominantly in the US, where obviously as a building owner and operator, the loss of revenue is absolutely massive, because the reputational damage to the building and the organization is huge. So what we've done is we've developed a 6-stage process over the last few years, assisting through the whole life cycle. So whilst we would work with different vendors, Schneider, Honeywell, Siemens, and so on, essentially we help design the network. Or if it's a brownfield site, we'll essentially do vulnerability scans, device discovery. Documentation and building management historically has been pretty poor. Going through to integration into the IT/OT network. We're even going so far as to do real-time employee location tracking through low-energy Bluetooth and things like that. So obviously very much fitting into the COVID world, the return to the office. So essentially with a Bluetooth key fob, we can actually identify if Bob was in the kitchen at the same time as Mary, and essentially they have to self-isolate from the rest of their colleagues. Obviously, I suggested, following the colonial pipeline, things like SOC services being deployed into the OT space, so looking for malicious intent or unusual activity. We've gone so far as to develop and working with partners to develop sort of single panes of glass, what are called digital twins of buildings. So essentially building operators can have a Cape Canaveral where they can see different facilities within the building, their operation, potential points of failure, lifts, and so on, down to user apps where individuals can book meeting rooms, they can turn up the heating, book a coffee. But as you know, again, coming back to that cybersecurity element, what we don't want is obviously an individual to be outside of the building, sat in the pub in Canary Wharf and turning all the lights off in the building and disrupting their colleagues with a beer in hand. And finally, looking through to actually certification of a smart building. So what does that look like? So indeed, we're looking to certify buildings. Sadly, Cyber Essentials does not do it because of that risk of life component within the building management side. You cannot certify a building to Cyber Essentials. And ultimately, how do we anticipate that building operators are going to pay for all this where budget doesn't exist? Well, that's through essentially smarter energy and utility management, where we hope that through partners we'll be able to reduce bills dramatically. So that's the life cycle. A quick look at some of the controls here. So this is obviously roles and responsibilities within a building where Dewberry will actually sit and manage, where the facility owner management is responsible, and ultimately will be performing assessments on actually the vendor's products. So the air handling units, you know, do they meet the latest standards? Are they secure? Many years ago, within one organization, we will put on a patch freeze for literally 18 months because every time we patched a piece of software or servers within an environment, it broke the building management software. Thankfully, that's now reversed, and it's part of the due diligence that the vendor is actually maintaining their software, i.e. the organization has appreciated that it must maintain its security posture. And if something breaks, it's not the Microsoft or certainly their supplier in ourselves fault, it's actually the vendors. And again, a bit of a view, obviously we are using other standards, so NIST, ISOs and so on, so just gives an overview, but you can see the network layering there. We've got untrusted through trusted layers. So level 1 is the sensor at the bottom, all the way through up to connecting to the internet. So going back to that definition of a smart building, whilst there are layers of security throughout the network, it's obviously very segregated and defined rather than just a free-for-all patch panel and plugging it all in. So what's next for Dewberry? Well, it is just a startup. Dewberry, it's the idea of Dewberry came about during that 4-year building refurbishment. We're within that building. We've just started a further 10 floors. So that £200 million project was just a 10-floor refurbishment. Sadly, for the client, they literally finished that project, or that first phase of refurbishment for the building, in March 2020. So until only the last several months has it actually had people operating within it, but it's a very nice environment. But certainly, yeah, what is the future for Dewberry and where do we see it going? Well, certainly we're engaging with more enterprise buildings, government and defence. We're talking to gigafactories, family art galleries and storage facilities. So any environment which has that IT/OT convergence, which is critical for the client. And finally, we're just joining this month an all-party parliamentary committee group on cybersecurity, where we're there engaging to assist in the concept of smart city and smart building integration. So obviously with the drive to green, there are many initiatives, as you will be aware, and certainly cybersecurity has not been, whilst it's been considered, that integration between an individual walking out of a building. What are the requirements for travel, for power outside of in the local environment as people leave the office at 5 o'clock? Just what happens to the power consumption, and how are those metrics obviously transferred into the smart city so that things can be turned on or turned up to ensure that the power is there? So perhaps in the future, a more presentation on smart city, smart building integration, but that is it.